Hey, this is John from John's Long Box. I'm not going to showcase Red Circle Comics Sorcery. This is the actual comic that the Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, and then it became Chilling Adventures in Sorcery, and then just eventually Sorcery. But I thought I'd do something a little different again, and more Gray Morrow artwork. I thought I would just talk about this right here, the Comics Code Authority. I mentioned it a few times, and I figured I'd talk about it. I actually did a little bit of research for this video, but the Comic Code Authority was created in 1954. Yeah, 1954. It was a self-censorship group, so it was it wasn't a government regulated or anything like that, but there was a book that came out by Frederick Wertham called Seduction of the Innocent, and he was a psychologist, child psychologist, and he did some shoddy research that showed that all juvenile delinquents read comic books, and but all kids were reading comic books like that. So of course, juvenile delinquents were reading comic books. But he blamed comic books for the erosion of America and teen pregnancy and stuff like that. What a lot of people, I'm just perusing this comic as I talk about this, but what a lot of people don't realize is a lot of comics were gory and very, horror filled at the time. Notably, EC, which was EC Comics, creator of Mad Magazine, and they had a lot of people get beheaded and zombies chewing people up, and it was really gory, and the more horrific, the better as far as their sales went. So there was truth to be told that in the 40s and 50s there was a lot of gore and horror, but did it lead to crime? No. And at the height of the McCarthy hearings, they had a subcommittee hearing on juvenile delinquency, and they brought a lot of comic creators to the Senate to speak. One of them being William Gaines, the owner of EC Comics and creator of Mad Magazine, Mad being Mad Comics at the time. And it was televised, and he just bombed. He just bombed, and you could see YouTube videos of him just staggering and stammering and sweating, and he didn't come off really well, and it really broke him because he was a good guy, loved the art, loved people, said he was just a dynamite fellow, and they just hounded him and made him look like a monster. And one of the things he did was he canceled most of the comics, and he made Mad Comics into Mad Magazine, and pretty much bypassed the whole comic book label, because in the wake of this Seduction of the Innocent book, people were having bonfires and burning comics, and even comic book artists and writers were changing their names. They didn't want to be affiliated with this, so you couldn't really get good talent anymore, and sales dwindled. This is why you had like Fawcett Comics. I remember I said they gave up Captain Marvel to DC because it just wasn't profitable anymore. Just the whole comic book world, it was over, and people were just saying that it was a fad and its time had come. So in order to stay solvent, relevant, and still sell a bunch of comic book people, they created the Comic Book Code Authority, and it was like a self-censorship organization, and it was done to placate, to keep the government off their back. So they came up with these list of criteria, and I'll share it with my computer screen. I don't know if you can see that, but I'll read that to you. But so in order for a comic book, they had to be submitted to the Comic Book Code Authority, and it had to follow. I know you can't read that, so I'll just read it to you while looking at the comic. But crimes shall never be presented in a way as to create sympathy for the criminal or to promote the distrust of law and justice. If a crime is depicted, it shall be a sordid and unpleasant activity. So you can't have criminals be good. Policemen, judges, government officials, and respected institutions shall never be presented in a way to undermine authority. Good shall triumph over evil, and criminals will be punished. Scenes of excessive violence shall be prohibited. Scenes of brutal torture and unnecessary knife and gunplay, physical agony, and gory, gruesome crime shall be eliminated. They they pretty much gutted EC Comics with that line. No comic magazine shall use the words horror or terror in its title. Also weird. So the word weird was stricken. I don't know why it's not in this article. All scenes of horror, excessive bloodshed, gory and gruesome crimes, depravity, lust, sadism, and masochism will not be permitted. All lurid, unsavory, gruesome illustrations shall be limited. Okay. And if you're going to use stories involving evil, it's to show that evil is wrong. No profanity, obscenity, smut, vulgarity, nudity in any form is prohibited. Suggestive and salacious illustrations and sexual suggestive postures are unacceptable. Females shall be drawn realistically without exaggerated and physical qualities. I'll come back to that one. Illicit sex relations are neither to be hinted at or portrayed. Rape scenes such as well as sexual anomalies are not acceptable. Seduction and rape shall never be shown and suggested. Sexual perversion or any inference to the same is strictly forbidden. Nudity with meticulous purpose and salacious postures shall not be permitted in any advertising. Okay? And there was more. They couldn't say mafia, they couldn't say zombies, and they couldn't use any references to the supernatural. So there was no werewolves and vampires and zombies. Okay, so let me get back to the drawing of women in regular thing. Wally Wood was a famous artist, and he created Power Girl for DC Comics. And if I was smart, I would have brought out a picture of Power Girl. But Power Girl was supposed to be the another world version of Supergirl. And every time he drew her, just as a joke, he would make her chest bigger and bigger and bigger, just to see how far he could push the line until she has ridiculously large boobs. It's just him messing with the Comics Code Authority. Marvel in the 70s made up the word Zoovumbi, which I didn't understand for the longest time until I knew about this Comic Code Authority, because they couldn't say zombies, so they made up Zoovumbi, and they couldn't. And it's funny because there was a Marvel writer named Marv Wolfman, and he couldn't use his name for a while because his name Wolfman was specifically, you couldn't put the word Wolfman in comics. So just to contrast this is a Red Circle comic, which is actual in line with Archie comics. And Archie and DC were the last. They gave up the Comics Code Authority in 2010. Marvel gave up the Comics Code Authority in 2001. And this was Marvel. Marvel made a magazine. I kept talking about Marvel magazines because Marvel, they had like a, I don't know, kind of embarrassment with comics for a while. And they wanted to be taken as a more adult. So they started Epic Illustrated, and this was one of the first of their magazines. And you note that there's no Comics Code Authority. Okay, so this, because it was a magazine, they could bypass at 1980. So this isn't the first. This is the beginning of the Epic line. You know, it has like the same ads as like a Penthouse, you know, and I think it was sold on Penthouse. I remember picking one up as a kid, and I was told to put it back. You know, ad for what is this? Filters or a car, you know. So these are adult. Okay, oh, I love this. This is actually the last Galactus story. So I never read this. I actually never even looked at this yet. So I just picked it up. Okay. Homespun. I mean, yeah. Trippy. You know, they're going after the heavy metal artists, the heavy metal crowds. You see, you got boobies on the cave woman. You know, so that's really the difference. I'll skip to another story. More boobies. Okay. More of adult. I don't know the quality of the stories, but because again I didn't read this one yet. But they you see the difference between a Marvel magazine without the Comics Code. So one of the famous stories is Stan Lee wanted to tell a story where Harry Osborn, which was the Green Goblin's son, which was Peter Parker's college roommate, got addicted to drugs, and they I forget, I think it was Spider-Man 117 or whatever, and this was like 1974, 1975, and the writer at the time really wanted the story done, and Stan Lee just said, all right, well, we won't put the Comics Code Authority. And everybody was like, you can't do that. So they didn't even submit it. They published it. And believe it or not, like anti-drug groups picked up on it and thought it was so brave and such a great story. And that was the beginning. That was the beginning of the end of the Marvel Comics Code Authority, which was a way of self-censorship because out of fear of a government clampdown during the McCarthy hearings of the 50s. So it lasted from 54 and it ended in 2010. And that's the Comics Code Authority. I'm sure I got maybe a few dates here wrong. Anybody correct me in the comments. I'll get back to reviewing comics, but I thought I'd talk about this little interesting tidbit of comic book history. Okay, thank you. Please like and please subscribe. Thank you very much.